Hello, we're going to walk through a fifth grade math lesson and how I organize and kind of how I think about my workflow when I'm setting up using the Modern Classrooms project framework. So, the first thing is here is my lesson. I think of what am I teaching and what is the standards. For this topic, I am teaching my students how to multiply multi-digit whole numbers using that standard algorithm. So now that I have a focus and I have my learning target for my students, I'm able to kind of use backwards design and how I want to organize the material for my students. So again, students will be multiplying using one digit up to the thousands place and working on their standard algorithm. So when I am creating my instructional video, I will create my Google Slides. So I always start off with Google Slides, and I like to have that learning target on there when I'm first introducing the video. Then I like to kind of have a wonder wall, which goes over what the students will be doing as a whole. And so you can see here, what are we learning? Why are we learning it? And when will students know that they've learned it? So I like to cover these three things. It's from John Hattie, and it really helps students focus in on what they're learning and bring that teacher clarity into the learning. Then I like to explain how they're going to learn it. So they're first going to do this, second, third, and fourth. Once I go over the expectations and helping my students wrap their mind about why we're learning this and how we're going to know that they've mastered this concept, I then like to give an example. So provide a workout example of what we will be doing. And then from there, we walk through together how to solve that math problem. So again, our focus was multi-digit multiplication. I walk through with my students. And then after I walk through with them, I try to have them solve it, and I like to use Edpuzzle. So when they are using Edpuzzle, I'm able to quickly see if my students have grasped the material. So I will often, again, walk through the lesson with my students, and then here, ask my students to place the answer for that question. And it really helps me just quickly see how many students were able to get it correct. And then I like to walk through how to solve it with them. And for this example, I was able to use those partial products and say, okay, here's part one, here's the partial product number two, then we add. And so I was kind of able to check each of those different steps with my students by walking through this video. I also love Edpuzzle because my students are not able to skip ahead and they're able to go back if they need to. They're able to, again, get those formative assessments that I might need to see as well. And when I do record before going to Edpuzzle, I use Screencastify. Screencastify is a great way. I'm able to have my face in the picture. I can have some annotating tools as well, but it makes it really easy. I like to upload my videos to YouTube so that way I can save room in my Google Drive. And then I take that YouTube link and add it to Edpuzzle, and that's where I add all of the questions, and I'm able to see their tracking on how much of the video they watched. If they had to rewatch any parts, I can see how many times they had to rewatch. And it just makes it really easy when I'm talking with students about those different things. I also find it really important to teach students, I use a Unit 0, how to watch a video. And so I talk about pausing, I talk about turning on the volume, putting in headphones, and taking notes. And so in that Unit 0, it's really helpful for my students to really understand how they watch a video. And before I did that lesson, a lot of times students would just play and they wouldn't have their headphones in, and they would come up to me for additional questions. And so we had to walk through, how do you watch a video? This next part is practice. So again, I go back to my standard, which was multi-digit multiplication using standard algorithm. And I will then either search my resources from my district or I will search the web. I also sometimes will use ChatGPT to kind of help as well with different differentiation. And so right here is a practice that my students will do for this standard. And what they're going to do is they're going to complete it individually and then they can work with a partner. So they're going to work with a partner, check their answers with each other, and then they're going to talk about any that might be different and what strategies they use. And if they did get an answer wrong, who made the mistake and where. So kind of providing that justification of what happened and why they might have made that mistake. Then I have an answer station where students will grab a pen and they self-grade their responses. There's a turn-in bin if it is on paper. If it's digital, sometimes I like to have it be scored by the computer so that way they get that automatic feedback. If my students need help or once they've finished, they can complete this Google form that I have for them. So they're able to say, I have a question, or they need to use the restroom, or they need have a technology issue. And based on this, if it was a teacher check, they're able to hit the next button, and then once they hit that next button, it will then ask them what number they need chucked on. So on my roadmaps, I have numbers along here. So they would just say number 3, and it allows me to pull up, if I need to, multiple students to conference with them that are at that same spot. Another thing that I like to use this for is if there's like a technology issue, and it allows that problem solving for my students. So they're able to tell me what they've tried before they just come to me, and then they can describe that issue to me. So it works on some problem solving with my students. Then when it comes to that mastery check, so again, I like to kind of provide that practice. I have some can-do activities before my students get to that mastery check, and maybe some aspired to-dos as well. And so once my students do get to this mastery check, what happens is it is typically printed on a piece of paper, and in my classroom, I have an area for mastery checks. And so students will complete this mastery check. And when they get here, I typically, again, have it printed. Sometimes it is digital. And what students will do is they'll put their name. I usually put what is the focus. I like to create 2. It makes cheating very easily so it's not able to happen. And then I also like 2 in case I need a student to retake the assessment. And so on here, students will place their name, then they will solve these 2 problems, and then they do a quick reflection of the smiley face, and they just color in which smiley face they're feeling. Down here is my rubric, and I like to review this with students as well. And this one, it kind of just says that they can solve multi-digit multiplication, where here they're not able to solve it correctly. Here's where they're able to solve one of those partial products correctly, but they missed one. And then here they might have made like some type of math error. So maybe when they were carrying and they forgot to add or they multiplied incorrectly, that would get them like a 3. So I look for those misconceptions, and I'm able to pull small groups with my students based on those misconceptions. And then after students complete that exit ticket, they then again complete that same Google form. And again, what I love about this Google form is I have a spreadsheet, and I'm able to highlight as I meet with my students. So as I meet with my different students, I am able to pull up this spreadsheet, and I can color code to show that I've met with them. Also, some of my classes have a co-teacher with like an inclusion, special education teacher, or an EL teacher, and we can be on the same document, and we're able to highlight which students we've met with. I can again say, okay, this number 7 student needs to move up because I can pull them and work with them in a small group, or hey, can you pull them to my intervention specialist? So this Google Sheet really does help when I am just kind of tracking students or looking for ways. And then I either hide the responses or I use it to see patterns as well. So that way I can help my students with some executive functioning skills or problem solving skills if I notice that they continuously come up for the same question, or if they constantly need to use the bathroom, I'm able to kind of track that as well. And then after that, next steps. So on my rubric, I love to kind of say where my students will go next. So will they go to the next lesson, or do they need to revise? And so if my students need to revise, I have them complete an error analysis. And so these are printed out. There's also a Google form, but I like to use the printed version. And they write the title of it, they write which question they missed, and then they have to figure out where their error was and how they plan to re-answer that question. And then they have to create a new question and answer it. And so once I conference with the students, after they have completed this, they are ready to do that second retake on that exit ticket, which makes it super easy for me to kind of grade and check and conference with my students. And they're able to go back and look at their notes or rewatch the video, or they can conference with a peer as well. Once they finish that error analysis, they're able to again conference with me, retake that assessment. If they do show mastery, then on that roadmap, students are able to move on. And typically it's like an aspire to do activity. So once they've met the standard and what was expected from them, then they can go on to some type of an extension activity. And I usually try to make those more of those aspire to do project-based learning type of activities or problem-based. And my students are able to work on those can do, or they can go back to those should do activities. Sometimes I might have the next roadmap as well ready for them to go. It just kind of depends on the pacing and where we're at in our schedule when it comes to student learning. And then here's that progress tracker. So again, reviewing those standards and then saying, okay, what do my students have to learn? Those are for sure the must-dos, those things that are covered in the standards for those students. So everything in the green must be met because that is an activity that is in the standards. Where the pink is maybe extending my knowledge or updating or lifting up that DOK level, so that depth of knowledge. So typically a lot of the standards might be at a DOK level 2 or 3. And so I like to kind of look at those levels and then say, okay, how can I extend that knowledge if it is a 2 to make it a 3 or a 4? Or can my students maybe need some additional practice on this activity? So those would be the yellow, pink, and then that aspire to do where it's really challenging students maybe by feedback or a peer discussion or even that PBL type of project. And I like to also add numbers. These have really helped me on that Google form where they're able to tell me exactly where they need help. And I also like to tell them when they are with a partner, and it adds that clarity of I can quickly say, okay, put up with your hands. What number are you at today? And my students can put up their hands and I can quickly do a check-in to see where every single student is at. Also, I teach my students how to use that shape tool. So once they have their tracker, they can go into the shape tool and they're able to add whatever shape they want. Honestly, I feel like the most popular shape is the smiley face or the lightning bolt. So then they can use this and they can track. I have some students that will duplicate this and then they just put it over each of the ones that they've completed. So I kind of allow them to have that personal preference on what they prefer when it comes to tracking their progress. Another thing that I have is a teacher tracker. And so there's a video resource if you want to learn how I set this up. But basically, behind the scenes is as students check in with me, I have this up as one of my tabs. And I just come in here and I'm able to check how they did. I can write in their scores. And then I can quickly see which students have not completed some of the teacher check ins that I need them to check in with or have not turned in things. So again, I like to keep this kind of to my own record. And then midweek, I will have my students receive one of these. And when they receive one of those Google Slides, it allows me to have a conference with my students. So I use Autocrat to set this up. And again, that video walks more in depth in how to set this up. But then I have my first name, my last name, and then I can create action items with my students. And this will replace with a check mark or it will replace with a score. And again, I'm able to have those conversations with my students about how we're going to get caught up. Or I can say, okay, let's skip this activity. It's a can do activity because you're behind. Or, hey, I want you to extend your knowledge and I want you to work with a partner on this project. So I'm able to have those really great conversations with my students. And again, I do this about midweek. So my students know exactly where they are at in that unit or that lesson. And then next thing is I have bins for students turning in their different assignments. And I also collect using Google Classroom, which is my learning management system. There are times where on my roadmap, I'll add Pear Deck and I'll just do the drag, like the little circle drag. And my students, I'll just say, okay, we're doing a quick check. Where are you at? And they'll just drag their little circle to where they're at. I usually add another slide after they complete that step with a reflection type of question. And then I can go in and quickly check, okay, who do I need to pull for a small group? All 5 kids are at this station number 3. I'm going to pull them first thing tomorrow because a lot of kids are number 7. So why is it that these students are so far behind? I'm going to conference with them to hopefully catch them up and get some misconceptions. Where number 7, I'm going to give them feedback on their infographics. And so it allows me to plan ahead for the next day on how I'm going to meet my students' needs. And then That is my roadmap, and that's kind of the way that I create my workflow, and what I love about it is creating those procedures. It allows me to not have to make so many decisions because this is just the way that my classroom runs. So thanks for joining me in my 5th grade math class and learning about how I am teaching multi-digit multiplication.